I've always felt most at home surrounded by trees. When I was a child, my parents moved us west of the city where I was born to a town in a valley with thousands of acres of protected land. The house we moved into, and where my parents still live today, abuts a large swath of conservation land that I spent most of my younger years wandering through, with friends, with my family dog, and often by myself. I felt most at home among those trees. I felt like I could breathe. And I remember feeling how lucky I was that every person in the world deserved a place where they felt as nourished and at home as I did there. It wasn't until many years later that I understood the privilege of those woods and learned the true wisdom and healing abilities that trees possess. That journey was as winding as any forest path. An invisible hand with a chokehold on my throat, beads of sweat leaking from my palms, body tense and frantic as my lungs ached for air. This is a feeling I knew all too well by the age of 5. I struggled with asthma that made it difficult for me to breathe, keep up with kids on the playground, and required me to miss chunks of school to sit in the nurse's office hooked up to a nebulizer. As many people living with chronic illness know, the stress alone of managing my condition could make it hard for me to breathe. My asthma made me feel broken, and I put myself in a box of who I thought I was and what I thought I'd amount to. This is how I knew I would never be a runner. Growing up in the Boston area, Marathon Mondays were spent outside along the marathon course, just before the crescendo of Heartbreak Hill. There was always a bustle of spectators, the thrill of standing beyond the sidewalk, toes perched on the curb precariously, wondering who would reach out for the water offered from my outstretched hand. Runners would rush by in a dizzying sea of movement in pursuit of something beyond. Awed by their heroic undertaking, I would cheer until my voice strained and cracked. It was the closest thing I could be to the action because I knew I could never be a runner. In 2005, my dad was selected to be part of a documentary about first-time marathon runners with chronic illness, training for the Boston Marathon. My dad had had heart disease since a blockage to one of his major blood vessels gave him a heart attack at the age of 43. I was 6 at that time, struggling to adjust to my own chronic illness. The group that was chosen for the documentary trained together for over a year. Their paths otherwise never would have crossed, but they became a team, a family. They transformed together, shedding self-doubt and gaining muscle and moxie. I didn't know much about anything then, but I could tell that they were growing into themselves. The day of the marathon, I showed up with my mom at our usual spectating spot at the base of Heartbreak Hill. I was dressed to run, and that's what I did when I saw my dad start pounding his way up that notoriously brutal incline. As far as I could manage, that was my plan for running with my dad, as far as I could manage. I had tucked $2 into my sports bra so that I could hop on the train in case my body reminded me why I could never be a runner. But I never used it. I ran the final miles with him. Crossing the finish line with him shattered every doubt I had about what both of us were capable of. I had harnessed the ease of breath that I felt among the trees, and I would take that with me to continue to push beyond my limits. As I watched my father slow to a walk past the finish line and wrap himself in those mylar blankets, I thought about the months of his hard work, the injuries, recoveries, the little victories, and the devastating setbacks, and saw his face alight with the humble pride of his accomplishment. That was when I knew that the ceaseless voice of my subconscious, "You're just not a runner," was full of shit. I don't remember when I first owned the term. I think it happened gradually, but the powerful feeling of my shoes hitting the pavement, the ability to turn a rotten day around with a brisk run, the high I get from pushing my boundaries, both mental and physical, to redefine possible, that's how I know that I'm a runner. It is a privilege to no longer be limited by my chronic illness. Living with asthma has brought me in tune with my health and made me curious about the health and well-being of others. The forest by my parents' house was an environment that gave me a sense of safety and hope in the face of my condition. Understanding how stress and environment can improve or exacerbate my breathing has been an intimate lesson in the importance of addressing social determinants of health when we're working to achieve equitable access and equitable outcomes with the populations with whom we work. 13 years after crossing the finish line with my dad, that Marathon Monday, I'm reflecting on the past year of learning, growth, and shift in identity. I'm on a very similar journey from self-doubt to parts unknown, yet in a much different context, working with dedicated and creative people in New York City to ensure that others have safe, healthy, and hopeful environments in which to live, grow, and breathe easily. There is a very stark reality for hundreds of thousands of public housing residents in New York City who live with leaks penetrating their homes, with thick black mold blooming across their walls and ceilings, and cockroaches inhabiting the nooks and crannies of their kitchens and bathrooms. I arrived here almost a year ago, committed to advancing health equity, but feeling like an imposter among the incredibly accomplished fellows beside me, and disheartened about starting from scratch at a new organization, about taking the hard road instead of the convenient one. I had been working on public health emergencies, but this new role brought me into an unfamiliar environment to address an urgent yet unconventional emergency: the rampant mold, pests, and lead-based paint making public housing residents chronically ill, depriving them of safe and healthy homes. While I felt called to the work, as we all do, I also felt that I was setting myself back by taking that risk in the new position. I was faced with improving housing conditions for residents living with asthma and other chronic illnesses that they suffer by no fault of their own. And that ceaseless voice of my subconscious was telling me I could never be a health equity leader. I didn't have what it takes. I just wasn't built for this. I let that voice of my subconscious stay with me for far longer than I'd like to admit. In fact, it's still here with me today. But the number of times that I've failed forward this year is too many to count. Each time I realized that I didn't have the appropriate stakeholders in a conversation, or I didn't ask the right questions to probe deeper into the root causes of inequity, or I didn't invest the time to better understand the values, resources, and interests of my stakeholders, that voice pipes up that I'll never be a leader, I'll never be able to move that needle forward. Crossing the finish line of this fellowship, as it were, does not feel quite like the satisfying breath of fresh air as crossing the marathon finish line. I haven't vanquished my self-doubts, and I have no fancy data to illustrate the precise impact my team has had on reducing mold occurrence or abating lead-based paint, though it has happened in fits and spurts. The year has been punctuated by tiny victories, like one-to-ones from which partnership, even friendship, have blossomed, like instituting cross-functional teams with representatives from our constituency, a small step towards flattening the dense hierarchy of our organization. While I still doubt whether I've become a health equity leader, I have put my shoes to the pavement, not letting self-doubt control me, persisting despite the uncertainty. This group has come together this year. Our paths never would have crossed, but we became a team. We became a family. This support has pushed me beyond my limits. Progress has been slow, but we're redefining possible, which brings me back to the trees. Trees, once planted, take time to root and grow big and strong. This year, my team and I have had our hands in the dirt, planting the seed that safe and healthy housing is a human right. It will take time to see the fruits of our labor, years, maybe even decades, but we're on our way. And the teachings and the people of this fellowship year have been the sunshine and the rain that have nourished the seedling of our work and guided it skyward. Scientists believe that being around trees reduces the incidence of asthma. Some communities are even planting more trees in residential areas to bring down asthma hospitalizations. But the lesson of the trees is far bigger than this. There is overwhelming evidence that trees actually talk to each other through a fungal network called the Wood Wide Web. One scientist and forester described it as a superorganism of unique individuals sharing information and resources for the whole community to thrive. Nutrients are actually allocated throughout the network based on those communications. It's pretty cool. Sometimes the thriving trees send their resources to those in the network that are most in need, and other times a dying tree will flush all of its nutrients out into the network, essentially sacrificing itself for the well-being of the others. The behavior of trees as valued participants in collective action for the health and well-being of their community speaks to the key organizing principles that we've practiced this year to build power and distribute leadership for health equity. The superorganism, the forest, is a beautiful metaphor for the health equity network that we have created that now extends from New York to Nigeria, from India to Iraq. And it mirrors some of the meaningful lessons that I've tried to sow, but that mostly I've reaped this year. Lesson number 1, trees talk. And when they do, they increase the resilience of the entire community. To identify solutions that advance equity rather than perpetuate systems of oppression, we need to talk to each other, to all the stakeholders touched by our work, to paint ourselves the bigger picture rather than the most obvious one. This means listening and staying attuned to the signals to better understand the challenges faced and their root causes. This network in my organization now is comprised of leadership from the executive level all the way down to the field workers who fix the leaks and remove the mold. The next step for us is to ensure our residents have a seat not just at the table, but also at the drawing board. Lesson number 2, all organisms are seen, communicated with, and accommodated just as they are. In order to create shared stories, commitments, structures, and strategies for action, we must recognize human beings as human beings. This sounds like a pretty obvious approach, but working in the bureaucracy of government as I do, it is alarmingly easy to become distracted by red tape and fail to recognize the humanity of others. Connecting with people by seeking understanding of their values, interests, and resources has been time and effort intensive, but this root system must be nurtured, and it is worth the investment. Like the trees, working as a superorganism, we must meet each unique individual where they are and with what they need to flourish. This is, as we know, the difference between equality and equity. Lesson number 3, we need to get out into our local forests more. By this I mean, it is so important to stay rooted in the context of our work. It can be a challenge to remain connected to the people who are most impacted by the inequities that we're tackling, especially when we have competing priorities like budgets and strategic plans to contend with. Sharing our personal narratives creates space and vulnerability for others to share their own, and this heart connection paves the way for strategy and action. Lesson number 4, for forests to flourish, we must save the old growth and legacy trees so that they can pass on their wisdom and nourishment. It's all well and good for a young and enthusiastic person like myself to arrive ready to hit the ground running with fresh ideas. But in order for the distribution of leadership to be sustainable, we need to honor the individuals who have seen it all, who can speak to the past and their hopes for the future, who bring dimension to the snapshot I see at first glance. We each hold the wisdom that we've gained on our respective journeys and our own unique healing abilities. Like the trees, we can draw on the collective wisdom and healing power of this network as we continue to work on the issues that plague our communities. In this way, we will continue to grow into ourselves as health equity leaders, battling through the self-doubt and mission on towards a state of health equity for our communities and beyond, where everyone has the right to a place of safety and health, the right to a breath of fresh air. We'll continue on this race to justice with our roots forever intertwined and firmly planted. Thank you. Woo!